I'm going to introduce our panelists in the order that they'll be speaking, and then they'll be coming up to the stage and we'll get started. First, we have Carla Santamaria, who holds a PhD with emphasis in Latin American, Caribbean, and U.S. Latino studies from the State University of New York at Albany. Her areas of interest are Caribbean cultural studies, Puerto Rican urban music, decolonial theory, U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico, and hegemonic cultural studies. Currently, she works as an assistant professor at the Department of Puerto Rican and Latino Studies at Brooklyn College. Yeah. And then we have Jose La Huerta. I will call him Josean because that's what everybody here calls him. He's a Centro Research Associate, and he has a PhD in political science from the Graduate Center here at CUNY. His current research focuses on the moral economies of colonial capitalism in Puerto Rico, and this research explores how ways of speaking, thinking, and feeling by different social actors, both historical and contemporary, on diverse social and political ills and their appropriate remedies, emerge and in turn shape different responses. To that end, he is examining a wide range of primary sources, including official statements and documents, public debates, journalism and literature, popular culture, and social movement practice and discourse. And finally, we have Karina del Valle Shorsky, who has a PhD in English and comparative literature. Y me dicen por ahí that she's graduating tomorrow, so everybody give her a huge round of applause for just becoming a doctor. Her scholarship focuses on women's multimedia practice in the Americas from Zora Neale Hurston through Ana Mendieta, and her broader interests include Caribbean aesthetics and theory, psychoanalysis, and feminism. As a literary translator, she focuses on 20th and 21st century Puerto Rican poetry. Karina also freelances for a wide range of publications, including the New York Times Magazine, where she was recently named a contributing writer. She is currently at work on a collection of linked essays on minor figures in Puerto Rican cultural history, The Other Island, forthcoming from Riverhead Books.
So thank you for being here. I'm Carla Santamaria, and my presentation explores Bad Bunny's work as a tension between political resistance and the perpetuation of the status quo. So I'm going to start by quoting Bad Bunny when on July 2019, he announced that he will be joining the protest against Ricardo Rosselló Nevares. On his Instagram, he posted a video, and he said that, "First, I want to pay my respects to all the people who have always been brave enough to take the streets and fight for our country. Respect to all those who have been oppressed, stigmatized, marginalized, discriminated, who have been portrayed as criminals, but they have always stood up. Supposedly, they have been only a few, and yes, it is always a small group." I have my issues with that, but I'm gonna let it go. But they do it with the heart. And I want to thank them on the name of those who might have never had the courage to fight for justice. So obviously, Benito's quote is an allusion to the hegemonic political culture in Puerto Rico. We know that it tends to vilify any anti-colonial movement, any group, any narrative that actually questions the status quo. And we know this is part of an agenda that was designed by the capitalist colonial state and was exacerbated by the Gag Law and Luis Muñoz Marin. And I know, just in case, the Gag Law, we know that it lasted for 10 years. It criminalized and demonized the pro-independence movement. And Muñoz Marin obviously was supported that law. However, it is also important to take into consideration that Muñoz Marin designed a narrative in which it was intrinsic to Puerto Ricanness to be anti-independentista, all right? And he also created this, let's say, this narrative of identity in which you can embrace Puerto Rican culture without the need of being an independent country, all right? So obviously, and by that I would recommend the work of Martín Cruz Santos. He made a great work and wrote a great book about that. Yet, even though the Gag Law is not valid anymore, we know that this is the discourse that we see in the media all the time in Puerto Rico. A discourse that demonizes the pro-independence movement, a discourse that demonizes any social movement that we have in the country, labor unions, strikes, etc. So it really caught my attention when I see somebody like Benito, a mainstream artist, being, or at least including certain anti-colonial images or statements in his work. So there are a couple of moments where Benito has done this. I will say that the first time was in January 2021 when he made a statement, right, for El Diario El País en España. And he said that, oh, we have to break with this notion that los gringos son los dioses, right, that gringos are gods. In his concert back in December 2021, he surprised us when he started by a documentary, right, by Hermes Ayala and directed by Arimaniel Cruz, in which he included images of different nationalist members, right? We have the figure of Blanca Canales, we have Lolita Lebrón, we have Pedro Albizu Campos, and we have Juan Antonio Correger. These are people that are usually stigmatized by the traditional historical narrative of Puerto Rico, and all of them were incarcerated by the government of Luis Muñoz Marin. And actually, in the case of Lolita Lebrón, we know that actually she was a political prisoner here in the United States and was incarcerated for 25 years. Also, as we discussed yesterday, el video El Apagón that Cacho talked about it yesterday, where at the end of his lyrics, he makes a clear denounce against Act 2022, and then the documentary, Aquí Vive Gente, right? So, but before I go on, I want to make a stop in here because even though I admire all this, I don't know what are the reasons for Benito to include the anti-colonial narrative in his work because he has never said openly that he's an independentista. I am not saying that he's not, all right? I am not saying that I don't think that this is important. I am saying that it's interesting to see that he's not openly independentista. And also, it's something that shocks me a little bit is that when I speak to newer generations, they see this este paso de Benito as something new and know there is a precedent of this. In the 2000s, we have Luis Diaz with Intifada, we have Hermes Ayala, we have 7-9, by actually people who their hip-hop work was very political and anti-colonial 100%. And because of its anti-colonial content, they never made it to the mainstream, right? In the case of René, Luis Diaz, 7-9, in the case of René, he actually made it to the mainstream, but as we know, he's been so vocal about his political ideology brought him a lot of consequences, including being censored for 3 years in Puerto Rico. And actually, the animosity of the media in Puerto Rico against René is very evident. So this is not new, right, having a precedent of political resistance in urban music. And even though any of them actually are reggaeton artists, we have to understand that, especially my generation, I'm a millennial, there was a very intrinsic relationship between hip-hop and reggaeton to the point that we are going to listen to a lot of songs that had a reggaeton background, but the interpretation was 100% hip-hop. So with that said, I still understand that what Bunny is doing is important. Why? Because regardless of his intentions, regardless if he's a real independentista or not, his platform, actually, it is consumed by a lot of people. And in a country like Puerto Rico, where our quote-unquote political analysis TV shows, we know that they have nothing to do with serious political analysis. Those are spaces that what they do is to perpetuate and promote the anti-colonial narrative, A, B, demonizing any time that we have a movement that questions the status quo, demonizing any person or figure that actually questions the status quo. So those are not real political analysis programs. Also, and I'm not going to say the name because no me da la gana de darles pauta. Y ni hablemos de los chismes, ni de los programas de chisme, ni todo. It's just a perpetuation. So obviously Benito is a counter-narrative to that, and a platform that is consumed by a lot of people. Because as I said, I'm just a professor. The only people who listen to me are my students because they have no choice. So it really makes a difference when we have somebody like Benito doing this. Now, in one hand, we have that. However, I do not want to fall into the romanticization of Bad Bunny. And the reality is that in one hand, we have that platform, but at the same time, this is the mainstream music industry, which has become an ally of capitalism, right? And we know that capitalism keeps perpetuating social inequity, also represents a commodification of popular culture. And by popular culture, I'm I'm referring to the definition that Juan Flores gave us, right, as an expression of a cultural expression of the low-income class sectors or the underrepresented. Once it's consumed, right, once it's grabbed by the market, we know that a lot of its images, of its original message has to be washed in order to please another market. So obviously all that is in there, right? The commodification of the everyday life, like Juan Flores used to say. So in one hand, we have like these two contradictions. First, we have like Turner's, and I think, yes, the work of Turner was referred to in our previous presentation, in which he actually explores the complicated and complex figure, right, of the celebrity and its role in political culture. And yes, in one hand, what we have in here is that in a new dimension, the celebrity can actually create a new dimension of community through the media. That's correct. But at the same time, like Marshall mentioned, David Marshall, the celebrity commodity provides a very powerful form of legitimation for capitalism models of exchange and value by demonstrating that the individual has a commercial as well as a cultural value. All right? So with that said, and when I was having all this debate with myself, ay Dios mío, ¿qué hago con esto? ¿Verdad? Como que el chamaco me cae tan bien. A veces mete la pata, pero puso a Lolita, puso al Bis, so you know, all that. I said, I'm a child of independentistas, una sobrina, ahijada. So to me, this was something big, right? Pero ay Dios mío, el capitalismo está de madre y la comodificación. ¿Qué es esto? But then it makes me reflect and think about myself as a scholar. As someone who tries to make the difference in my classroom, but I still belong to academia. And academia is a very Eurocentric, clasista, elitista, all right? No matter how much I try to make the difference, I cannot escape from it 100%, even if I want to, okay? Estamos hablando que aún en las universidades públicas nuestros estudiantes tienen que pagar. Estamos hablando que hay un filtro. Si tú no tienes el promedio, tú no puedes entrar. So, ¿qué tan diferente soy yo de Benito? Bueno, económicamente mucho. Y él les cae mucho mejor que ustedes. La luz a ustedes le cae mucho mejor que yo. O sea... ¿Verdad? O sea, no, eso es cierto, ni me puedo dar el lujo de salir con un jevo que esté bien bueno. No, eso no. O sea, en ese sentido somos distintos. But who I am to criticize him, right? Who I am to judge him, right? With that said, then I remember Stuart Hall's analysis on popular culture, right? When he says that popular culture should be taken as a battlefield. And what do we mean by that? And this is my emphasis. Popular culture is just an artifact. Yes, sometimes it's going to be grabbed by the capitalist machine, and it's going to do horrific stuff, and it's going to perpetuate the status quo, and it's going to perpetuate our official oppressive narratives. Y otras veces nosotros vamos a tener el poder de retomarlas, ¿no? Como pasó en el verano del 19, que se perreó frente a la catedral con un perreo intenso. All right? Y otras veces va a haber un Bad Bunny, ¿verdad? Que quizás pues, no puede escapar 100% de las contradicciones del sistema en el que vivimos, pero ha usado su plataforma, independientemente de qué hay detrás, ¿verdad? Ha usado su plataforma también para cuestionar unas narrativas.
That's a hard act to follow. Una de las cosas de estar en un espacio como este con so many smart people is that, you know, no tiene el impostor syndrome activado. Pero I'll do the best that I can. So I wanted to talk about the sort of transgenerational dialogue within the Puerto Rican radical left, right? During the last few decades, which would comprise Benito's lifetime. And then yesterday, I hear Cacho say, pues yo soy el nieto de Juan Maribra. And I'm like, okay, pues ya. I don't have anything else to say. I'm done. But seriously, so among the many cliches, right? That both positive and negative, right? That have accompanied, Bad Bunny's rise to mega stardom globally, right? Is his supposed status as spokesperson for a generation, right? La llamada generación del yo no me dejo, which roughly translates, right, as the generation, the I won't let you generation, right? I won't let you mess with me. I won't let you take me for a fool, and so on. Benito famously first voiced this phrase in the song Afilando los Cuchillos, which, as all of you know, was written and performed by him together with René Pérez, also known as Residente, and Ileana Cabra, also known as Ile, during the 2019 Puerto Rican uprising, which resulted in the resignation of then-Governor Ricardo Ricky Rosselló. The phrase has been cited again and again to underscore the generational aspects of the uprising, right? So it generally indicates a defiance that is supposedly characteristic of the age cohort that is believed to have been the driving force of the uprising, and particularly its more confrontational aspects, right? People in their late teens to early 30s. As Carla pointed out, Benito himself, right, when he first got involved, recognized all of the people that have always been struggling. But then when he comes out with this particular phrase in the song, it opens itself to certain readings, right? And it definitely squarely sort of puts a focus on these generations. And Centro Director Darimar Bonilla yesterday in her opening speech talked about structures of feeling, right? Raymond Williams' famous concept which refers to emergent qualities, right? That supposedly sort of mark a generation, right? So when people are talking about la generación de yo no me dejo on the sort of strictly political arena, this is what they're pointing at, right? These kids have experienced all this stuff, right? Which is new, which is different, and that's why they're so willing to put their bodies on the line and confront the police and push harder and no se dejan, right? So that's what this expresses. Now, I want to actually talk about a little bit beyond that, because the more that my colleagues at Centro know that I've been doing a lot of work around structures of feeling, but the more that I look into it and that I think about this particular period of Puerto Rican history, right, the last 20, 25 years, which have been, I feel, sort of dramatically understudied, right, I keep coming back to traditions, right? So there's this kind of, I would call it dialectical, because I'm kind of old school like that, right? Interplay between the emergent structures of feeling, but there's also these political traditions, right? Which, as Carla rightly pointed out, right? With the images of the revolutionary nationalists in the FKN concert, suggests, at the very least, a kind of inspirational affinity, right? Regardless of whatever his actual political stances are. So that inspirational affinity to that political tradition is there, right? So how do we think about that, the relationship between the emergent and traditions? And so fortunately, for me, right, geographer Ruth Wilson Gilmore has talked about infrastructures of feeling, right, when thinking about the Black radical tradition, and that's prompted me to think about the Puerto Rican radical tradition, right? And we could talk about traditions in the plural because, right, all of the things that have been talked about in this conference. But at the same time, I think that if it's worth thinking about Puerto Rico as this kind of space, right, and it's a transnational space, and it's a dialectical space, and it's a space that goes beyond mere geographic space, but it's a space, right? So even if it's traditions in the plural, it's traditions that correspond to this space, right? Un mundo en el que caben muchos mundos, right? The Zapatistas would say, right? So we're talking about one space with many different possibilities, but so it's one tradition, it's one radical tradition. That's the way that I'm thinking about it, at least. The Bad Bunny as spokesperson trope, right? That I mentioned as I talked about as a cliche, is in many ways a version of a broader narrative, right, according to which recent events, such as the 2019 uprising, are emergent, they're generationally defined, and in many narratives, they're spontaneous or at least organic phenomena, right? A different but in my view, related version of this narrative has been embraced by many among us in the academic community, by many scholars. And as an example, I have this quote from philosopher Rocío Zambrana, and this is not a criticism of Rocío's work, which I find incredibly important, but it's an example of how even Rocío, who is somebody who is very historically minded, right, sometimes tends to fall into this sort of narrative of, she's very careful to say it's not spontaneous, right? And she does recognize the work of these sort of newer, more visible organizations that all of us know about, La Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, Jornadas Acabaron las Promesas, right? We've all heard of them because they are amongst the most important radical political organizations on the ground in Puerto Rico today. But then there's kind of this after, like this coda that is kind of latched on, right? Where she talks about a history of several diverse struggles of resistance. And I mean, it's complex, like everything else we've been talking about in this symposium, but it feels like an afterthought, right? And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today, right? Last summer, I interviewed 20 people, activists from a diverse series of organizations who have been leaders or grassroots participants in a diversity of movements in Puerto Rico, but all of them sort of self-identified as radical, right? In one way or another, connected to this revolutionary tradition, which is, there's the nationalist tradition, but then there's also the socialist, right, radical tradition in Puerto Rico. And Correger is a very interesting figure in that later in life, right, he starts as a nationalist and then he declares himself a socialist and a communist and so on. And he's the leader of La Liga Socialista when he dies in 1985, right? So all of these organizations are connected to this radical tradition in one way or another. And I interviewed these folks, and Bad Bunny did come up several times during the conversations, probably because the Un Verano Sin Ti concert had just happened, or was about to happen, and everybody in Puerto Rico was talking about it. Of course, that's the concert where he famously insults Governor Pierluisi, right? Which is one of his many forms, ways of kind of connecting to this radicalism and to the story. Also, I want to talk a little bit, I'm talking about the sort of the story of the political organizations, but we also have to talk about what's going on in popular culture, and specifically in the tradition of reggaeton, right? One of the quotes that kind of caught my attention looking at the transcripts is from Javier Maldonado Farril, or Javi. Javi, like me and many of the people I interviewed, and many of us here, where my Gen Xers are, right? Is in his early to mid 40s. He's an art professor, but he's also a founding member of Papel Machete, which some of you may have heard about, right? The image on the right is from the 2010-2011 UPR student strike, and that's one of their most famous giant puppets, El Estudiante Militante. And then the image on this side is from Vieques, and it shows one of the aspects of the Vieques struggle that is least talked about, right? Because we're always told that it was kind of this peaceful, like consensual, like, oh, you know, and it was actually a lot more confrontational than people think, right? So what Javi said, and I think I'm actually going to end with this, but Javi said, yo no me dejé. I don't necessarily feel part of that generation, but I didn't let them, cabrón. What are you talking about? My generation kicked the Navy out of Vieques. My generation had the 2010 student strike. We somehow helped create the conditions for the 2019 uprising to happen, right? So that's his quote, which kind of prompts me to do this kind of work. So that slide was I was going to talk a little bit about what was going on in reggaeton during these decades, but you all get the picture, right? I have Vicosia, I have Tego, and I have René at the end, and the quote under René is from Afilando los Cuchillos, and there are direct references to the lyrical tradition that Tego represents and so on. I just wanted to quickly, this is a collage that I put together really quickly, and it's just sort of events that I know were in the media, right? Somebody talked about in the last panel about the things, the reggaetoneros now grew up watching Dragon Ball Z and all this Japanese animation and this and that. Well, this is the other stuff that was on TV when Benito was growing up, right? So I just, I like to do this exercise and I'll go through it quickly just to get us talking about it, right? Benito was 4 years old during the July 1998 Huelga del Pueblo, or People's Strike, against the privatization of the phone company. Right? 4, and I know that some of my earliest political memories are from watching Cerro Maravilla on TV, and I was about 4 at the time, right? 9 years old in May 2003 when the US Navy finally left Vieques, so he was 6 during when that happened, right? The Peace for Vieques March in February of the year 2000. He was 11 in September of 2005 when machetero leader Filiberto Ojeda Ríos was gunned down by the FBI. And there was also a less known but very important student strike at the UPR that year. He was 12 in 2006 when the debt crisis was formally announced. Almost 14 in February of 2008, right? When there was a teacher strike that paralyzed the school system for 10 days. I'm not sure if he went to public school, it's likely. So his school is likely to have been closed during that time. I know his mother is a teacher, right? I don't know whether in the private or public school system, but it's likely that they would have been, there would have been at least sympathy in the household, right? 15 in October 2009, when kids his own age and younger in Canóvanas pelted Governor Luis Fortuño's car with rocks and eggs as a result of Law 7, which basically resulted in the firing of 30,000 public employees. Right? And almost 16, when the 2010-2011 student strike started at the UPR, right? And he was a student at UPR Arecibo, briefly before he was discovered, right? So, although he hasn't said so publicly, these processes, which were generated by and through, right, in part, by the painstaking work of previous generations of activists like Javi, who I quoted, right? They were all extensively covered by local news and widely discussed during his formative years. And just on a final note, not included here because, again, I was looking for specific events that were sort of highly covered by the news media. But we can have the same discussion about what's happening around LGBTQI+ rights, those movements in Puerto Rico during this era, and to a lesser extent, the discussions and conversations around race. But yes, all of this is happening as Benito is growing up. And I'll leave it there because I know I went over. So.
Yes, hello, I'm Karina, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some kind of stray thoughts that I had that didn't quite make it into the profile I wrote in 2020 of Bad Bunny for New York Times Magazine. And I'm really grateful to be presenting with both of you because I also want to think about not just the historical period defined by Bad Bunny's career, but the historical period defined by his lifetime, as you were beginning to allude to, or actually talking about explicitly. But I want to talk about it a little bit from a more interior perspective, or connecting kind of the emotional life of Bad Bunny's music to that historical and political period. First of all, I just wanted to thank Centro for framing the conference in the way that it's been framed, thinking with Bad Bunny, because I think it really captures both the intimacy we feel with Benito, the kind of witness of it, which is what I'm trying to kind of capture here in this collage. All of the photographs except screenshots are photographs I took during periods I've spent in Puerto Rico over the last 10 years. And these were all taken during my reporting trip, thank you, to Vega Baja. This is the mural in his hometown. That's my great aunt who also lives in Vega Baja, Titi Justicia. And here we were at Charco Azul, which is a local river spot, trying to get our car up out of the place it often gets stuck at the bottom. But I also like the phrasing of the conference title because it indicates to me how we can use Bad Bunny as a tool, that Bad Bunny is not just the intimacy with Benito, but thinking with Bad Bunny as a kind of like arma or whatever, to connect with each other. And it's exciting to be here because so many of you, whether it's on Twitter or on real life dance floors, for me, have been Bad Bunny as much as Bad Bunny himself, and kind of want to highlight the way Bad Bunny is a collective phenomenon and not, obviously only a celebrity. And I think that when we talk about his place in Puerto Rican politics, and I think it's really important to read those public moments that have been discussed, kind of like going from the Jimmy Fallon show Estamos Bien moment through the Alexa tribute, Solo de Mi, El Choli, and of course, explosively, the Telemundo concert. I also think he's not the most informed or insightful political analyst in Urbano, broadly construed. I think Cardi B is a really intelligent political thinker, and or even in Puerto Rico, because I think Viana is articulating, political insights that Bad Bunny maybe isn't interested in or capable of or whatever. And misogyny, misogynoir, transmisogyny are obviously at play in our perhaps overvaluation of Bad Bunny as a political spokesperson. But I do think there's really an uncanny power in his capacity to serve as a channel, or the kind of feedback loop that he's been able to establish in a at least, I don't know if I feel like that power, that moment may be passing a little bit, but thinking about the feedback loop between his audience and him that produced the phenomenon we think of as Bad Bunny. In the profile that I wrote, I quoted Ralph Ellison from an essay that I love called Living with Music, and I just want to share that quote, which is, perhaps in the swift change of American society in which the meanings, Pan-American, in which the meanings of one's origin are so quickly lost, one of the chief values of living with music lies in its power to give us an orientation in time. So when I interviewed Bad Bunny, there very tragically was a glitch in the recording. It was my first profile ever, so baby journalist mistakes. And this part wasn't recorded. I really wish I had the quotes, but I observed to him and asked him a question about the fact that he often makes sad songs with sad lyrics and happy melodies, and or songs with happy lyrics and sad melodies. So like an example of the former would be like Si veo a tu mamá, and the latter would be something like obviously classically Estamos Bien, or even Yo no soy celoso. What I wanted to say about the reason that I asked him that question is because I feel like Bad Bunny from Soy Peor through Andrea really has there's this lasting kind of Puerto pessimism or whatever in his, whatever you want to call it, whether it's, sad boy trap or emo, and Yari Marbonilla and also Rocio Sambrina and also Isabelia Herrera have all talked about this kind of critical negativity that animates his music. And when I interviewed him and when I asked him this question about the kind of mismatch that sometimes happens between the melody and the words, he made the connection he sort of free associated to the black flag as a symbol that embodies a similar contradiction. And I thought that was really prescient, and that there is a kind of a negativity that has a more timeless quality that maybe isn't just about this current political moment. And I just wanted to share these photographs as an example of that. The first is a graffiti that I saw deep in a cave in Juana Diaz. As you can see, it's like marked with the 1951 here. And I know it's an effect of the material that it looks like a black flag, but I think that there's something in Bad Bunny's music that taps into a sort of like a timelessness of Puerto Rican mourning that has been mobilized in a new way during the time period of his career. I want to connect that to Bad Bunny and Gen Zs in general, sort of Y2K nostalgia. And a lot of the time we associate nostalgia with a sort of like positive valence, like things were better then. But I don't really think that's something that that Bad Bunny does. I think people have talked about it partly as that Y2K nostalgia as associated with the moment of the mainstreaming of reggaeton, and I do think that's an important kind of attribute of that time period. But I also think of it, as you were saying, Jose, as a part of a political arc, of a kind of unchangingness or stagnation that Bad Bunny has experienced and his peers have experienced in their lifetime, a kind of how did we get here, that has a depressive tone. And this, I just wanted to pause on this moment of Si Veo a Tu Mama. I don't know if you guys remember the music video for this that has this suicide plot. On the left is graffiti that I saw in Santurce. And on the right are stills from the video. It also takes place in 1999. It's the 2000 New Year's Eve. And it shows kind of that Bad Bunny is doing an archaeology, sort of an archaeology of a feeling that we associate with now, but that he is already implanting, historically at that moment of the year 2000. But I wanted to pause on another 1999 moment, which is his song Rolandito from Por Siempre. As probably many of you, maybe I'll just read a paragraph that was cut from my piece about that song. On Por Siempre, Bad Bunny titles a song RLNDT, sucking out the vowels, the breath, in a coded tribute to Rolandito Salas Jusino, a 5-year-old who went missing in Toalta, Puerto Rico in 1999 when Benito was the same age. The lyrics never mention Rolandito explicitly. Instead, his spirit haunts the track as an alter ego, a little boy lost in the no man's land between blessed anonymity and brutal fame. I'm translating now, since the impact here relies less on Bad Bunny's clever rhymes and more on the way his words tremble inside Tiny's warped, windy production. Hello, who am I? I don't know, I've forgotten. But he hasn't forgotten, not really. Rolandito is evidence that he remembers where he came from in rigorous detail and remains committed to the expressive possibilities it offers. And later in the song, there's also that line, no sé si es ayer o si es hoy. And I think of Rolandito as a kind of moment of micro-mourning. It happens right before Estamos Bien, and it's almost an extended song. The production is almost the same. It has that kind of like windy, eerie, nostalgic quality. And to me, it's a kind of example of the way, more broadly, at that moment in Puerto Rican history, a moment that we've lived, the personal mourning that we were feeling about our own individual loved ones that were lost in Hurricane Maria got catalyzed into a more collective feeling or a more political feeling. I don't know if you can see, but it says no olvidaremos with kind of painted over. It's one of those graffitis that's been painted over in Viejo San Juan. And I kind of just want to put a pin in that border between a timeliness and timelessness that Bad Bunny activated in this moment, and kind of contrast this no olvidaremos with a line in Estamos Bien, which is la vida no tiene repetición, and thinking about the extent to which repetition does or does not animate our visions of the future, and to what extent we can mobilize those kind of individualized feelings of aimlessness or personal mourning into a more collective feeling. So thank you.
These were just really fantastic presentations. I'm so excited to get into conversation, and I have comments for all of you. For anybody in the audience who's interested in asking questions, just start formulating them, and then you can go up to the microphones that we have to the side. So I'm going to start with Josiang. I really, Josiang and I have talked about Bad Bunny a lot, and I really enjoy having these conversations with him. And I think, the first time that he sort of laid out this timeline for me, I was like, oh my God, Josiang always saying it's like, esto no sale de la nada. And it really sort of is sort of the leitmotif of his whole research, right? He's really sort of illuminating these stories that haven't really been told, no sale de la nada. And I think yesterday we were also talking about whatever we might think about, that it is like really brave for Bad Bunny to sort of step up and like make these statements. And we can't forget that just, a few years ago, Calle 13 and René were just, they were censored, right? Like they just could not play in San Juan. They weren't played in the radio. There was a lot of political persecution. And I think you were going to touch this a little bit in your like reggaeton slides. But I'd love to hear more from you about like what you think has shifted that has allowed to sort of Bad Bunny publicly say these things. And even like Carla mentioned, like show Corretjer and Lolita and Albizu in his videos and sort of be like, I was obviously like very moved by it, but like I saw people celebrating it and everybody was like, oh my God, it's so cool that we've gotten to this point. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Karina, I mean, there's so much from there that I want to sort of like build upon, but I'm really interested in how you talk about Bad Bunny as a collective phenomenon. And I'd love to hear more about that, especially because for those that don't know, Karina has this really amazing piece also for New York Times Magazine on social dancing in New York after the pandemic. And I'd love to hear more about sort of dancing to Bad Bunny as a political act, or how we connect through that. Like, I think in my own sort of the way I engage with Bad Bunny, like I remember in those like long lockdown months, like going on walks and listening to Zafaera and just thinking like one day soon I'm gonna be in like a sweaty New York party with all my friends and we're gonna be like dancing to this, right?
I have something for you.
But I mean, I know that there's a lot of engagement with that, but I'm really interested to hear more about this sort of collectivity, but also like how dance as a political act and an act of like sort of like radical community building that I know you've sort of touched upon. And then Carla, I leave you for last because I know this is going to be like, it's the question that we've all been asking, and it's the question about market, right? Like, can you be? Puedes estar en la calle protestando, ser un revolucionario, si lo queremos llamar un revolucionario, if like you're making millions and millions of dollars. And you're sort of beholden, in a sense, to this market. You have endorsement deals. Like, what does it mean to say these things and sort of be on the streets if you have a contract with Adidas, con Corona? And I think I was thinking a lot about Vanessa's question earlier. It's like, what do celebrities owe us, right? And especially when there are these all market conditions. So those are my questions, and then we'll go to the audience.
I mean, one factor clearly is that Residente opened the door for Benito. There's, at least in terms of the politics of the state, of the Puerto Rican colonial state, not necessarily race politics, gender politics, the politics of Puerto Rico's status, whatever you want to call it. René opened the door. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And that doesn't mean that there isn't expressly political expressions in Puerto Rican popular culture over the years before. I mean, we've all heard, right, Daniel Santos, right, who was a member of the Nationalist Party. There are plenty of plenas that are explicitly political, right? So that there we have a tradition again, right? But in terms of contemporary music and then contemporary market, René opened that door, and Benito walked right through it. And the interesting thing is that René has a personal biography that ties him to this left tradition that I've been talking about, because his mother was a member of the PSP, right? Benito doesn't, right? So Benito's maybe a little more interesting in that sense. He's also a little bit more calle in that sense, whereas René, his personal curation is so expressly political and Latin American in a way that has kind of alienated him from the market in Puerto Rico a little bit, right? But he opened that door. And the other factor is that, somebody mentioned it yesterday, right? Benito never signed with a label. He has his own label. And so at a certain point, he was just big enough that he could do whatever, lo que le da la gana, right? And he did lo que le da la gana. What's more interesting is why eso fue lo que le dio la gana, right? And I mean, I haven't spoken to him like Karina has, but I don't know if she would be able to help us with this either. We don't. The point is, we don't know, right? We don't know, but I think that one of the reasons that some kid from Almirante Sur, who has no family, as far as I know, right? Some family connections to the left, right? So many of the people that I know on the left, so many of the people that I've interviewed are red diaper babies and stuff like that. But that's not necessarily, I mean, that was never always the rule, right? I know plenty of exceptions. but it was the tendency. It's not necessarily the tendency anymore, and you see kids who don't have this history, who have estas inquietudes, and how does that translate into building a bigger movement? I think that's the bigger question, and I don't think it's one that Benito can answer for us, right? But so why Benito? Why now? This idea of we have to explain him. Well, look, what he was living through. Like so many people have already said here.
Can I go next? Is that cool? Yeah, I actually think that Benito, being not from a political family, he described his family to me as very caught up in the quotidian, that they talked about. He wouldn't tell me what party his parents voted for. My sense is they are not independentistas, clearly, but I think that that's part of what enabled him to be a kind of everyman and be a model of the political transformation that a lot of people have undergone in the last 5 years or so. And for a lot of, he was not the only person for whom 2019 was their first street protest. That at the height of the protest, 1 in 3 Puerto Ricans were involved. Not all those people are independentistas, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that one way to look at his refusal to come out as an independentista is cowardice, right? I think another way to look at it also, though, is a shift in how leftist politics are experienced, described, articulated in Puerto Rico, and kind of non-sovereign futures shout out situation. I know you're working on this, Yarimad, but that it's decoloniality has sort of taken the place of independentism in certain ways, and I think that's partly a reaction against even somebody like Residente, a certain machismo, and also a not intersectional enough articulation of independence. I think that's partly a reaction against that. Anyway, I don't think that's conscious necessarily on Benito's part, but just talking about a broader tendency that's going on. In terms of dancing, I guess, I thought that I would read another paragraph that was cut from the story, which echoes exactly what you were saying, Chris. And then I have something to say about it, but it feels petty to say so, but we expected such a different spring and summer for Yo Hago Lo Que Me Da La Gana, an album of nearly back-to-back club bangers, including 2 of the most anthemic reggaeton hits in recent years, Zafaera and Yo Perreo Sola. Quickly, Yo Perreo Sola took on an unforeseen alternative meaning. Rather than telling men to keep an admiring distance on a crowded dance floor, I found myself literally and radically alone, perreando sola in my studio apartment in the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. To keep morale up, my friends and I posted Instagram stories of ourselves twerking to sweat-drenched rhythms in our quarantine pajamas with our ratty t-shirts tied at the ribcage to give our waists room to wind. But we never stopped mourning that other spring, that other summer, in which we could all sing along, gesturing lewdly in each other's faces to the first line of Zafaera, que falta de respeto, mami, que te atrevas a venir sin panties. Now, when we don't wear panties, our bras, it's hardly an erotic provocation. It's because we've stayed in our batas all day, struggling to emerge from a sinkhole of political dread. So I'm sure we can all relate. But I think dancing is important because it is the way this individual creator who's also not individual. Yesterday I was talking with Suzy and Gata about what a collective project most pop songs are. Even if Bad Bunny is the headliner, there are so many people from different places involved in the production of these songs. So anyway, it gets diffused back into the collective via dancing. But I do want to also just kind of tag the cruel optimism that is involved for a lot of women in dancing to this music. I wrote recently about aguacero, and I said, yo soy un cuero y tú también. The men sing and we dance, but do we all understand the desire that sustains the exchange the same way? The words feel impoverished to me. They do not seem to honor the rich mysteries of the mornings. He would wake me early to touch me in the morning in the sun like I wanted. In aguacero, there's a certain tension between words and music, communication and sensation, as if what transpires between bodies encodes a reality that runs counter to our stated expectations that exceeds them. So this is about how the dancing or embodying this music produces effects beyond what the creator of the music can anticipate, basically. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to be very honest. I do not know the answer if you can be a revolutionary and be a billionaire at the same time. And it's a question that I get a lot, right? With Benito and also at some point with Residente. But to be very honest with you, I don't pay too much attention if el artista es genuino or no. I pay attention to what you do with your platform, because that is what actually could make a difference or create a shift in the political culture, or at least could also start some conversations. That's what actually I pay attention to. The intentions of the artist, I will never know. That's one. Two, as I said, in a system like this, how can we really fully escape a system like this when no matter where we're trying to make the difference in one level or the other is connected to the status quo? And I gave the example of academia, but that could be anything, right? So usually my answer is, yo lo que no creo es en los absolutismos. Ni en la romantización de Benito o de Residente o el artista que nos esté haciendo pensar. Pero tampoco creo en ese simplismo que a veces caen los académicos de, no, pero es sexista, pero es homófobo, pero es capitalista. Okay, we are not going to neglect that. Y tú también. Y yo también. Yo meto la pata todos los días. And that doesn't mean that I shouldn't reflect on those metidas de pata. All right? But what I'm trying, but my point is, yo lo que no creo son esos absolutismos ni en los purismos de que solamente si la lucha no es completamente pura, no hagamos nada. Porque ¿cómo entonces vamos a hacer algo si cuando nos están dando unas plataformas que son, digamos, que tienen acceso a tanta gente y las vamos a descartar solo por purismos o por clasismo o por aporofobia, como bien dice Adela Cortina? Okay, o hasta cierto punto, porque, Dios mío, aquí mis colegas, yo creo que me van a matar, de aquí yo salgo cancelada. Porque los académicos no quieren perder un privilegio tampoco de que yo soy el que tengo la verdad agarrada por la mano. Y a mí un chamaquito de Vega Baja o de Barrio Obrero que no no tiene la gramática perfecta que tengo yo, ni tiene el conocimiento de Gramsci ni de Marx que tengo yo, va ahora a robarme el show. Sé que tenemos un par de preguntas, pero lo que yo le quisiera contestar a esos académicos es, pues, ¿cómo tú quieres hacer un cambio si tu forma de hacer las cosas, la gente no tiene acceso a ellas? Porque tú hablas de una manera que nadie te entiende, estás en un espacio donde casi nadie tiene acceso. Entonces, ¿cómo yo voy a pretender que personas que no tienen la formación política que tienes tú, que aún teniendo esa formación metes la pata, igual que yo, cómo tú vas a pretender entonces que hayan unas conversaciones y unos cambios? So that is my answer. I'm sorry.
I have a general comment because I think it's relevant to what this panel is offering. There's an exhibition downstairs that everybody should go to because it, I think, aligns very perfectly with what's being discussed here, and it also looks at the diaspora. Y de vuelta, curado por Laura Bravo. Everybody clap. You don't need to clap, actually. But everybody should go because it's been like in the works for years, and it's finally being exposed. So make use of that. And then the other thing is that I think this panel is doing a really good job at engaging with this idea of temporality in a way a la Ian Bancom, but I don't want to say him. in the way that like it's looking at time as it's accumulating, and then like also looking at citation. I guess Karina more specifically grounded it in a kind of performative analysis, but a la misma vez, I feel like each of you are engaging with it in different ways that are not completely legible to me, but the cues are there. And so I just will have a general question about how you think the present is imagined. Estoy tratando de ponerlo in a way that makes sense, that doesn't sound too like confusing, because we're looking at, I guess, what's happening now, but also what's happening in 2019, and then what happened in like 1998. So how, I guess, no sé, como que, how is the present imagined in Puerto Rico? Thinking with that bunny, no sé, no quiero hacerlo muy specific, but at the same time, como que, how do you think about time as it is? Como que, si hubiera un Puerto Rico ideal, I guess like, that may be utopic, but at the same time, si hubiera un Puerto Rico ideal, ¿cómo se imaginaría el tiempo de otra manera distinta? Or how could mourning and grief be processed through different cues? And I'm trying to just process that, because the panel is giving me, I guess, como que ese tipo de información para procesarlo dentro de la idea de temporalidad, and then also thinking of it through the recent book of Habitar lo Imposible, which is looking at pretty much the same stuff that the exhibition dancers is doing, but they're doing it through like a performative lens and literal performances. So esa es mi pregunta.
Saludos a todos. Quiero realmente felicitar a Centro porque han sido días sumamente, ¿verdad?, llenos de mucha información y me ha encantado. Mi pregunta va, por ejemplo, tuvimos a Benito cuando estaba filmando la serie de Narcos, que utilizó esa plataforma para sacar su tarjeta electoral, ¿verdad? Hemos visto también, como han mencionado, Residente, Tego Calderón, Edidí, ¿verdad?, que han utilizado esas plataformas. ¿Qué piensan o qué predicción tienen a futuro para Benito? Ya que los dos partidos principales ahora mismo en Puerto Rico, ¿verdad?, prácticamente se encuentran colapsados. ¿Apoyará la alianza entre Victoria Ciudadana y el independentismo en Puerto Rico? ¿Qué piensan? Estamos a 2 años. ¿Verdad? Ahora mismo se encuentra la batalla entre Jennifer y Pedro Pierluisi. Y el Partido Popular, pues se ve, ¿verdad?, que ganó Jesús Manuel en la contienda de ahora por 180 votos. Así que me gustaría conocer su... Y muchas gracias.
Okay, congratulations on this panel. My comment and question has a lot to do with the crisis of the left in Puerto Rico and everywhere. I mean, everywhere in Latin America. And the ways your comments and your presentations have been articulating this critique of the left in many ways. I mean, even though Josean is pointing clearly at the politics of protest in Puerto Rico, which I think are crucial to the ways mourning is connected, right? Particularly after Hurricane Maria and what happened in the summer of 19. So I wanted you to comment a little bit on how this crisis of the left and the languages of mourning and loss are kind of like key to articulating not only politics related to joy and performance, but also protest and mobilization.
Hi. So my question is sort of about what you guys think about when it comes to Bad Bunny's engagement, or sometimes even like disengagement in politics, and what that sort of has on like younger generations coming up, especially, you know, when thinking about how much of a platform, like you guys talked about the platform that he has, and it's very important about what you do with that platform. So more so, do you think that what he's doing with his platform is going to help or not help in incoming generations coming up and how they view Puerto Rico and politics in general?
Y por último, una exhortación para disfrutar a Benito como lo que es y no exigirle que se defina sexualmente en asuntos de raza o político. Y ya, disfrútenselo.
I'm going to start with Daniel. I could say if we think about our society today, and we think about what are, let's say, those communities that we understand are underrepresented or underserved, I assume that our utopia and our idealistic society will be a society where we don't have those inequities, right? Right now we have inequities based on gender, on race, on sexual orientation. As I spoke, like for example, even political ideologies, right? How certain groups are demonized, persecuted, and even murdered in some contexts, right? So in one, I will say that a society that actually doesn't have any of that. Now, at the same time, the social scientist in me says that every society has contradictions. So if one day we achieve that utopia is going to have contradictions as well, that we don't know what those contradictions are until we get there. So I'm assuming that that ideal Puerto Rico, right, for now, is one where we don't have any of those inequities. Pero ¿cuál será el Puerto Rico ideal una vez lleguemos ahí? Porque unas contradicciones van a surgir también. I don't know. All right. There was another question, about Benito in the future, if he will support Victoria Ciudadana or Partido Independentista or the Alianza, if they finally get the Alianza. I don't know, however, I wouldn't be surprised because en las elecciones del 2020, él apoyó la candidatura de Natal. So I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to actually go further now and support one of the, if the Alianza va a la gobernación como una alianza o uno de los dos partidos, I wouldn't be surprised either. About the last question on Benito's legacy on new generations based on his platform, I understand at the moment that young people begin to have these conversations, to me that's enough. Yeah. All right. Maybe some of them are going to create awareness, some of them are not, but the fact that there was a conversation that we didn't have before or that previous generations never thought about, to me, that is one step ahead. And yesterday when Cacho was speaking about Betances and how many people started Googling Betances after this thing of, oh, Benito maybe is, thinking of Betances, that's what I have always thought about. When the documentary came out, in el concierto P.R., I had a friend de la izquierda, bien independentista, y me dijo, sí, pero los jóvenes ¿saben quiénes son esos? Y yo le dije, that's the whole point.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like independentistas in there. I mean, she was too, but also figures like Angela, the poet Angela Maria Davila. Like there are deep cuts in there, like that. For people who are interested in doing the homework, there are a lot of cues. I also wanted to take up Daniel's question about time. I'm sure we're just going to answer everything about time today, right now. Just kidding. So when I was talking about Rolandito and talking about the Y2K nostalgia and everything like that, I was talking about timelessness, a vision of timelessness as a kind of stuckness. Yo no sé si es ayer o es hoy, that lyric. And I also wanted to show a slide that I didn't show of a graffiti that says, si siempre hemos sido colonia, como podemos imaginar ser patria. So this kind of, feeling of stuckness in the endless loop, the endurance of coloniality, all of that. So I think there are kind of like two ways out of that I'm imagining right now. And one of them is some of the historicizing gestures that you guys are talking about. And I wanted to connect that to the court case that's going on the case that's going on right now against all of reggaeton by innovators in dance hall over dembow. And the kind of question is, like, will reggaeton be able to historicize itself and pay what is owed in order to open a future, So I think that, like, one answer to the stuck timelessness is a historicizing gesture that is humble and honest about Benito's and Puerto Rican reggaeton's place in history. And another way to think about it, though, is a utopic timelessness, or what are some of the things that repeat that kind of open up another kind of future, or that reveal the future already present in the past, or whatever. And with that, I think a lot about repetition, and the repetitions of bomba, the repetitions of samples, and about the way music can create a kind of timelessness where in a coro, or whatever kind of song it is, you repeat it so many times that the differences in the meaning start to reveal themselves, so that the same starts to feel like the changing same, to cite Baraka, but the ways that repetition or timelessness can open up a sense of possibility rather than stuckness within the sameness, I guess. Yes.
Ok, gracias por todas las preguntas. Quiero empezar con la primera y quiero contestarla en español. Is that okay? Does everybody here understand me when I speak in Spanish? Con la pregunta sobre la alianza electoral. Y nada, mi contestación es la misma de Carla. Y además a mí eso de predicciones, a mí no me... ¿Verdad? Yo no adivino el futuro, pero sí sería on brand para Benito, ¿verdad? Así que habrá que ver si la alianza esa se da también, pero yo creo que es más importante de la cuestión electoral, ¿verdad? Y no asumiría que Benito comparte esta impresión, pero para mí es pues lo que se dé o no se dé en la calle, y se siga y no se siga dando en la calle. Yo creo que cualquier proyecto electoral que tenga una esperanza de lograr algo en Puerto Rico diferente tiene que estar conectado, profundamente conectado, con lo que la gente esté haciendo en la calle. Y en ese sentido, lo que yo estoy tratando de hacer con mi proyecto, que es un poco, yo lo veo como un proyecto de memoria, ¿verdad? De preservar, de acordarnos, ¿verdad? Lo mismo que dice Benito, de que mira, siempre hubo gente peleando y muriendo y siendo perseguida, etcétera. Incluso en los momentos en que nadie lo estaba haciendo, ¿verdad? O sea, los compas y las compas que yo he entrevistado se refieren a eso como trabajo de hormiga, no de hormiguita. La hormiguita, el trabajo que hace chiquitito, pero se va acumulando. Entonces, eso es una frase que yo conecto mucho con Daniel Viglietta, el cantautor uruguayo, donde las hormigas al final de la canción pican al pie que las quiere pisar, ¿verdad? Así que nada, y por ahí entonces podemos empezar a hablar de la crisis de la izquierda. Obviamente la izquierda está en crisis en todo el mundo desde los 80, ¿verdad? La crisis de la izquierda no es noticia nueva para nadie. Aún así, yo soy parte, ¿verdad? Yo me identifico como parte de esa tradición de izquierda que está en crisis, ¿verdad? Entonces, hablamos de la crisis de la colonia, tenemos que hablar de la crisis del anticolonialismo y de la izquierda en todas sus versiones, ¿verdad? Hay nuevos discursos que no son tan nuevos. Es una de las cosas que yo trato de decir, ¿verdad? Porque no podemos ver esa tradición de izquierda como un monolito. Sí, tenía cosas malas, era machista, era homófoba. Hasta cierto punto hay sectores que lo siguen siendo, racistas, o por lo menos no dispuesta a hablar de la raza. Eso está cambiando, pero más importante todavía, que es lo que creo que a veces se nos olvida, ha cambiado. Estamos donde estamos hoy porque durante los últimos 25 años ha ido cambiando poco a poco, ¿verdad? Estando en crisis, porque las crisis también son oportunidades, ¿verdad? Entonces, cuando hablamos de la colectiva feminista, hablamos de la jornada, que también tienen sus issues, tienen sus problemas, tienen sus peleas internas, ¿verdad? Con todo y los discursos replican también ciertos modelos a veces, ¿verdad? A veces, y se equivocan, y a veces lo reconocen, a veces no, ¿verdad? Pero son gente que salieron de esa tradición, ¿verdad? Y que se formaron en esa tradición. Y entonces cuando uno se sienta a hablar con ellas y ellos, te hablan de eso con orgullo, ¿verdad? Te dicen, estos son los problemas que yo tuve y por eso fue que me salí. Pero eso fue lo que a mí me formó. Y no solamente las cosas negativas. Hablan con mucho orgullo de la gente, los compañeros y compañeras que siguen en sus propias organizaciones y siguen metiendo las patas y siguen haciendo sus cosas, pero que les ayudaron a ver el mundo de una manera diferente y asumirlo de una manera diferente, ¿verdad? Su forma de estar en el mundo. Y nada, con eso entonces llego al punto sobre la temporalidad y el tiempo, que para mí es algo súper interesante, no directamente relacionado con el trabajo que yo hago sobre los movimientos sociales, pero sí, o sea, está ahí. Y yo creo que o sea, es correcto verlo en mi trabajo. O sea, yo tengo mi marco teórico tiene que ver directamente con la acumulación, ¿verdad?, de tiempo y cómo, o sea, yo soy en ese sentido bien benjaminiano, ¿no? El presente, el futuro y pasado están conectados y cuando pasan cosas en el presente es porque el pasado explota en el presente, ¿verdad? Y hay cosas, perdón, explota literalmente. Así que nada, quería hablar un poquito más sobre fantasmas y cosas, pero creo que voy a dejarlo ahí porque no tengo más tiempo.
Ok, muchas gracias.